policy and lawmakers to bridge the regulatory and policy gaps. I don't really have a lot on this one. I leave it to the experts in the room to maybe dissect that a little bit further, to understand really what is the regulatory framework in Mauritius to innovate. I know that there is a sandbox to do innovation, but is that sandbox for social innovation? Maybe there's a question mark there. Third is about increasing participatory research. Big words, but it essentially means working with local and national stakeholders, specifically grassroots actors in the research that we do. So prime actor would be MRIC, working with communities directly, involving them in the research and development process. And fourth, I think is a major one for pretty much every country that's wanting to do social and grassroots innovation correctly. It's about bridging that disconnect between decision makers and the realities on the ground. So we can think about Mauritius and we can think about traditionally excluded communities. We can think about vulnerable communities and so on. And we can think about how do we bring them closer to decision makers. And I work in the Accelerator Lab. One of our mandates is exactly that. But I know in the past year that this has been the most difficult thing to do. So that's the first four. The next four is also some of the aspirations that we have for the sector. One would be bridging tech gaps. Tech gaps meaning skills in digital and skills in tech. In Mauritius right now, there's a major skills gap. We have a lot of courses in our academic institutions that are proposing various paths for people, but where are the students going? Do we have data on that? We don't know. What are they doing? What is the value in doing so? And what are the type of jobs that they're getting in the end? How are they bringing back value in society? So how are they innovating at the social and grassroots level? So there's a major skills issue to actually develop the sector to the potential that it can have. The sixth one is how do we increase institutional support for our grassroots and social innovators? So if you think about government right now, would you say that government is an innovation-friendly entity? Seeing some heads nodding. Don't be scared. Well, traditionally, governments haven't been seen to be innovation-friendly spaces. That's not because people in government don't know or don't know how to innovate or don't want to innovate. It's because the environment that they're in don't allow them to innovate. So that's a major problem, and we would need to speak of some sort of reform institutionally to make sure that our innovators are supported from A to Z. The other one I want to speak about is partnerships. Actually, a lot of what I took away from yesterday's conversations was the fact that we are moving towards more and more partnerships. But do we really evaluate the impact of partnerships? Maybe that's where research could come into. Because public-private partnerships, PPPs, are everywhere. But actually monitoring the real-time impact of PPPs is not there. So maybe that's something that we need to invest in while we increase the partnerships. And then final aspiration for the sector is reducing silos and moving the sector towards not just one sector, but an ecosystem of sectors. You probably have heard the word ecosystem. It may mean a lot, it may mean a little to people here, but it's actually quite a powerful metaphor for what we want for the sector. We want it to be lively, we want it to be dynamic, and we want it to be this sort of budding ecosystem. When you think about, I don't know, marine life, it is an ecosystem underwater that we know little about. Social and innovation is exactly that. And to make my fellow panelists happy, I'm going to talk about a metaphor yesterday that I used, which is the bees and trees metaphor. So Bees are the small organizations, the small groups, the grassroots communities generating new ideas every day. Why are they bees? They're bees because they're quick, they're mobile, and they can cross-pollinate. And then we have the trees. The trees are bigger organizations like the UNDP, governments, businesses. They are resilient, they have the roots and scale and the know-how to make things happen. But the obvious thing is that both bees and trees will need each other. And later, Subhashini will talk a little bit more about this. So I've sort of ran through the aspirations for the sector in quite a quick manner, because I don't want to delve too much into it right now. We'll have a panel discussion of about 2 hours where you'll hear all about them. But how many of you are thinking, she's completely mad? They're not aspirations, they're impossible to actually implement. Impossible or possible? 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 Possible, raise your hand. So we got it right. We were right to name them aspirations. So whenever there are aspirations, there's also the feasibility exercise that needs to go with it. So we did what traditional people traditionally do, SWOT exercise. We did a SWOT exercise to understand what are the strengths of the sector. I'm not going to go over all of them. I think what's important to highlight, A, is that this sector has a lot of positive mindset around it, but positive mindset won't get us to where we want to get to, but we should recognize that as a strength. There's also increasing interest to use grassroots and social innovation to tackle some of the most pressing social issues of our times. One is the ecological disaster that we're going to see coming, or we're already seeing. That's where you see environment, sustainability, compatibility with the circular economy, and so on. And the other thing is, we could be working towards a healthy and prosperous planet, but what if our people are not happy in this planet, which might already be the case? So a strength for the SNG sector is increased well-being and human development. And we see that in countries like the Scandinavian ones. They've been classic example for many, many decades, 2 decades possibly. And then I wanted to highlight the role of specific sectors. For example, civil society. Civil society space across the world is actually diminishing, which is very worrying. And social and grassroots innovation has the potential to bring civil society back up. But then we have also other actors like the private sector, where guess what? The funds are concentrated in private companies. So how do we get private companies and civil society to become best friends? That's another question. Let's go towards highlighting some of the weaknesses. Many of the weaknesses around social and grassroots innovation is what I talked about earlier. It's this inadequate culture for social and grassroots innovation, but Tony might have a different perspective for us later on. Stifled incentives or no incentives at all. Another one is the skills gap. Spoke a lot about that yesterday as well for Mauritius. And then one I want to highlight, because it's going to be a bit where I concentrate for the panel, it's this lack of data sharing culture and knowledge transfer. Who in the room knows that we have an open data policy, a national open data policy in Mauritius? You know. So, but I didn't see many hands up. So, you know, there are resources, but do we know about them? So the knowledge transfer is lacking. And then, of course, I could go into the others, but they're very obvious. Scaling is one of them. You could start at grassroots, but how do you get it to the national level? How do you move it from a community in Rivière Noire, in the west of the island, to becoming a national thing? So scaling is a major weakness in social and grassroots innovation. So let's stop talking about the weaknesses and let's start looking at some of the opportunity areas in the sector. I was talking to Sophie earlier and she told me, don't you think that consumer demands are changing? Don't you find that to be an opportunity? I said, yeah, that's true. Because 2 years ago, I decided, I've lived in Geneva for the past 5 years and I've been taking planes everywhere. I was working for an organization that was putting me on planes every month. And at some point I decided I'm not going to travel as much. I'm going to actually say no to traveling. And that was a conscious decision on my part to not, leave behind such a big carbon footprint. But that's an individual choice. Now, if everyone in the room is maybe thinking the same, we might go towards change. So the shifts in consumer behavior is an opportunity. And actually, there's a lot of growth we're seeing from the discussions that we've had that l'approche communautaire is becoming quite big. And maybe we should be leveraging on that. Second, an opportunity and also a challenge in the same way is the scale of social challenges today: unemployment, the climate crisis, poverty, and so on. So the scale of social challenges means that we need to collaborate, and we can't do innovation in isolation or innovation that goes to the pockets of a few. We need innovation to work for everyone. And the other opportunity is we need, as a country, to be moving along the skills ladder. The World Economic Forum brings out a report every year, and they put the top 10 skills out according to the research they've done. The top skill is critical thinking, the ability to ask questions, the ability to solve problems. It's not how well you do in technology, it's how critical you are in your thinking. So I think social and grassroots innovation, the sector, has a lot of potential to move the needle on skills and human development. And of course, the bandwagon. Social and grassroots innovation is high on the agenda of many international institutions. Can we afford, as a small island economy, to not do that, to not jump on the bandwagon? If we have other interesting ideas, we could be, a lone actor in the Indian Ocean doing our own thing, but we can't. So these are some of the opportunities, and we'll probably have some more time to discuss this in the panel. Then the big threats. This is where we come back to the threats, the gaps and challenges again. And to be honest, I think I'm quite optimistic that we can move the needle on social and grassroots innovation, and I hope that you are too. But some of the things that we're seeing as potential deterrents or barriers are these things. One of the major challenges is that social issues are moving at rapid paces. They're shifting every day. 24th of February, Russia-Ukraine conflict started. Probably geopolitically, we've been waiting for this moment. The next thing will be China, Taiwan, and we're waiting for the moment. But they're shifting every day, and we don't know how to respond. I said to a friend when Russia-Ukraine happened, I said, I'm quite happy to be on my island. And they said to me, you won't be when you don't get to fill your car tank with fuel. So these social challenges are rapidly coming at us, rapidly disrupting our lives, and we're continuing to innovate in our bubbles. This is not going to hit it correctly. It's not going to happen. So we need to think a bit bigger than our bubble. Second thing that I wanted to point out on this list is unclear goals. This morning I was sitting in the travel and tourism session, and everything seemed so clear to me because this industry has clear-cut goals. This number of tourists by the end of 2022, or these numbers of arrivals by Q3 of this financial year. For social and grassroots innovation, we don't really know what the goals are, except to make everyone feel that they're valued, that their ideas are valued, and that they're contributing to this society. So tourism industry, we can measure the success of whatever intervention it is. Social and grassroots sector can't measure the success. How do you know your country is doing well? GDP, anyone? GDP, right? You measure productivity. But do you know how happy your people are? No. So these are some of the lack of clarity we have around metrics, which is very important to get right. What do we measure? How do we measure? What do we place value on before we can actually start to unpack what social and grassroots innovation really is and what the potential is. So I don't know how much time I have. Good. I'm wrapping up. So where do we go from here? That's probably the question that's on everyone's minds. Luckily, we've done the work for everyone. I'm joking. There's a lot of work to be done still, but we've found 5 strategic orientations. Dr. Pidoli spoke about them earlier. One is we need to find what is our shared understanding of social and grassroots innovation. If we get that right, we might get the sector right. Second, we need to be creating an enabling environment or ecosystem that is locally in the context of the Republic of Mauritius, not forgetting Rodrigue. The third one is how do we encourage social entrepreneurship? Not to be conflated with social innovation, 2 things, different things, but equally important. Fourth is skills, spoke enough about that. And fifth is open data and research. So how do we move towards those practices? And with that, I will pass it on to Tony, who will give you a more concise case study to contextualize everything that's just been said. Thank you.
One little announcement, nothing to do, impossibly connected to what we've just talked about. I've been asked to make an announcement. A car needs to be moved, BV 1607. Anybody from the room? BV 1607? No? You wanted to give away your car? Is it BV? No?
Hi, my name is Tony Leon Lan. I'm just going to tell us about a project that we've been working on in startup, financed by MRIC. If not, we won't have a project. I might take a little bit more than 5 minutes, maybe 7 minutes, if you allow me a couple of minutes. So, So our startup is social innovation. It's called an Angel. It's a digital platform, but there's crowdsourcing and crowdfunding also at the same time. And our tagline for now is always changing: is do good one action at a time. Before it was changed, Mauritius one action at a time. All we're asking people to do is to do one action. So the context, the problem that there is, like we have a financing gap in social innovation here. The SDGs also, as you may know, the 70 SDGs, we need 7.5 trillion USD per year so we can reach the SDGs by 2030. And in Africa, we need 1.5 trillion, but we only have 0.2 trillion. So we way out. So what we thought is to, okay, so the other gaps that there is, NGOs, as you know, a lot of NGOs here, you know that better than me. Some problem with human and financial resources. If I want to do good, we had that during COVID. Where do I go? How can I help? No one knows where to go. And for donors, the same thing. But also when we look at donors, the issue is where you don't have enough data to be able to make your decision to give to NGO A or B or C. And this is where we come with our solution. It's a gamified crowdsourcing, crowdfunding platform, which uses a data-rich environment, so focus on data. So we can match the do-gooders with organization in needs to complete positive impact successfully. So that's what we do. It's got a reward system. It's earned sort of reward points that you can get. It harnesses the power of community to be able to do that. So people might not have money, but they have time, or they have things we don't use at home. And this is why we want to recycle, part of circular economy. We also aggregate information of the third sector, which is very important. I've been in a situation where the projects, similar projects, same locality, same region, but no one knows about each other. So I think this is a bit of a problem also. And we actually have a system for impact management, impact measurement. So we can have more data about campaigns, about NGOs. So we know where to put our money, basically. So our vision, very ambitious. So we want to be the #1 platform for doing good. And that's not just in Mauritius, but also internationally. This is our app. We're working on version 2 now. So it's easy to use. It's only a few clicks. If you're a volunteer, you just find a campaign, you opt in, and you validate your deed when you've done. And sometimes we might ask you to fill in a survey. If it's a cleaning campaign, how much 100-liter bags did you pick up, or how much was plastic, how much, etc. So we collect the data, we crowdsource data and harvest data from the ground, the grassroots. So you earn points. So with your points, we have an ecosystem with suppliers. For example, cinema at 10 o'clock in the morning, there's no one. So we ask cinema people to give us these tickets, so for cheaper. So we can give it to people who may be unemployed, who's done some volunteering, can take the family to cinema. So we reintegrate people socially. NGOs create a campaign, it takes 5 minutes to put anything. It's not just NGOs. If you want to do something around your area, you can put it on there and find people to help you. So it's not just NGOs. Same for donation in kind. So our proof of concept was in Mauritius. It's a small place. We have now it's about 200 NGOs that actually registered with us. There's, according to the registry, there's 400 and something NGOs registered, but there's more than 1,000 NGOs in Mauritius. We've run about 250 campaigns now, so it's in old slides, involve various SDGs. So our potential is international market. Mauritius say it's 1,000 or 2,000 NGOs. In South Africa, where we're going next, is 200,000 NGOs. And in the US, is 1.5 million NGOs. So the market is big, and I think there's some value in our application. So what's our competitive advantage? So we all-in-one encompassing platform. It's the #1 platform for doing good. So if you want to crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, reward system, donation, donors can find information, can track their don. We focus on data science. This is very important to us. We use emerging technologies. At the moment, we're implementing blockchain on our donation. So you can track where your money has gone to, because that's in the public ledger. So you can say, okay, I've given this to this campaign. Some of it has gone to the beneficiaries, some of it gone to staff, some of it to suppliers. So you get a full transparency what happened with your money because it's in a blockchain. Yes, we have various functionalities, campaign management tool. We've launched during the Waka show. We saw how it works overnight. We created the hair artisanal album, which doesn't, because we didn't have any, but I mean, it has its environmental impact also. We've got an e-wallet and e-shop. So economic value generation, we just came out on an accelerator in South Africa. Everyone talk about business model. You want to see VCs, but this is a social project. But we have to create a business model. So how we can make money, even that we're never monetizing it. It's a platform transaction fee because we have our own sort of token, put it that way, to be able to use the blockchain. We can take money every time there's some transactions, etc. Data insights and reporting. I mean, we're going to give this for free. So NGOs will be able to print reports after a year to talk about the campaign, how they did, help them in the monitoring and evaluation. But we can monetize that also. And then that's what I talk about. It's this thing I've seen 20 years ago. It's called barter card. It's about the cinema tickets I told you, or restaurants maybe between 4 o'clock and 6 o'clock when they're doing preparation, they can give you 50% off. It's off-peak, haircutter, etc., etc. But yes, so we actually pride ourselves in the social value generation. We nudge people to do good. It's a value-based community. We're building an impact data lake to connect financial instruments like social impact bonds, etc., and use AI also to predict outcomes. Yeah. So we promote strategic partnerships because as we are central repository information, you can see what your organizations are doing, maybe collaborate. We've done lots of collaboration since we've started between NGOs, empowered NGOs, professionalization of NGOs, even for volunteering. If someone has failed school, they can go and do volunteering work. We'll give them a digital CV. We're working on that framework to be able to give them some what skills we've developed, and we can take that as a CV. We combat unemployment because people can find things to do, collect points. As we get suppliers more onboarding, we can exchange their points for a food pack. Yes, and social integration. So the team, that's our team. Lots of people come and go, and the team gets bigger and bigger because it's for purpose. We have lots of advisors, very prominent people that's been helping us. We've been supporting by the University of Cape Town, Stanford Seed, MI. We're part of Google for Startups. Yeah, so we won some awards. We've been cited in a UN document, Blockchain for Smart Sustainable Cities. The support, MRIC, thank you very much. Without you, we wouldn't be able to do that. Google, Amazon, just given us $30,000 to use their services, Graduate School of Business, and obviously our company, which obviously put all the money because it's a free app. So our roadmap is to launch in South Africa in Q3. So when we look at the monetization, actually after 5 years, our revenue is about 8 million USD, which is not a joke. So if we monetize what we say and we do our business plan, because we had to do our business plan for during the acceleration, it's quite a bit of money. We want to launch in India, and in 5 years' time, or 3 years' time, we want to be in 5 countries. So what we need, I'll end with that. So we need to build more use cases, grow our team in South Africa, develop some more of our IP, all the frameworks and different features, and market and communicate. And this little thing here on the left is 2 million USD. So that's a lot of money. So that's to give you a bit of context, how much money we need to raise to be able to be in South Africa and to be successful. So it's not no joke. You can't do that with 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 rupees, but we do get from competition, etc. Sorry, this was I've sent a revised slide. So what we need for Mauritius is to grow the community, find partners, we're giving back partners to give things to people, but we really need to grow the community because it's a platform, it's a marketplace, so we need users. Today we have probably up to 2,000 people registered, but we need more to get it going and to make it work. So thank you very much. Okay, there's a slide missing with all my details. Happy to connect with you afterwards. We also have a table out there. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Tony. And without further ado, I now call Raj Markun himself. From my generation, we've grown up seeing him doing what he will do next, moderate sessions like this. So I'll ask all the panelists to come over. Please.
Well, thank you, everybody, for this very nice presentation by Ayushi and Tony. We don't have much time on our side, so we'll have to really try to be concise, precise, and move towards specific goals. In my opening remarks for 3 minutes, what I'm going to share with you is that innovation in easier landscape is complex. innovation in more complex landscape like social and grassroots is even more complex. The first challenge we have is, in fact, to be able to connect. And it's very interesting by the work done by the team of MRIC presented in the process. We won't go into the details. You have the process, and I think that report is very important. Secondly, I think it was important to share with Ayushi what is happening, the big picture. And that's also important. But also we went micro in terms of Tony, what he did as a case study. In fact, our challenge will be to connect l'infiniment grand with l'infiniment petit in a complex landscape, which we'll have to do. I will just give a very small storyline before we start our conversation. You know, in 2009, when the laws were changed in Mauritius to put CSR into place, I still remember the days. It was on the 22nd of May 2009. In the budget speech, the then Minister of Finance announced that 2% of profit would be used for CSR. And then there was about 3 months of work that was done to set the guidelines, to create the space to be able to do CSR. In 2009, we had only one foundation. Today, we had more than 40 foundations. We changed the landscape. But in the same time, over years, instead of being given the space to spend 100% of your CSR, that amount was reduced to eventually 25%. We changed the landscape again, and the space was quite restricted. What I'm saying that creating the space and deconstructing the space has an impact on innovation, and that's very important. So without much ado, we have the panel, a mix of policymakers, Subhashini, Ayushi, a mix of practitioners, Sophie, Tony. We have also a mix of people from academia. We have Keith. So we have a mix of different sort of background, which is important. But more important, you've been listening to us all the time. So we'll make time for you. I promise we won't take more than 40 minutes. Each speaker will have about 5-6 minutes to set the ball rolling, and then we will take a Q&A session. How are we going to structure our discussions? You know, Aviraj did explain that in the background work about some pillars which emerge in terms of the issues. Do we have a shared understanding of SNG innovation? What is the ecosystem we've been mentioning about? What is social entrepreneurship we've mentioned about? And the skills that we need to be able to unlock and access to data. So Subhashini will start with a quick contour on a shared understanding, given that of a background of policymaking. We'll be joined also by Sophie, because as a social entrepreneur, she has a very practical sort of experience. But then Tony will come in on the ecosystem, notwithstanding that there are a number of issues that we have to know. Keith will come in with respect to the skills, to the capacity we have to develop. And then Ayushi will conclude on the data component, and that's very important. Each one will have 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, we will try to let them know that we're not happy, and therefore then you will have time to be able to start the conversation. Without much ado, we invite Subhashini from the Ministry of Finance, someone with whom I worked very closely in my previous incarnations. And we are very privileged to have someone like Subhashini trying to share with us from her prism as a policymaker in terms of what is the shared understanding on the SNG innovations. Subhashini, you have the floor.
Thank you, Raj. I just wanted to we are talking about shared understanding, but I'd like to pick up from what Ayushi and Tony said. I think even if this social and grassroots innovation is a nascent area for Mauritius, it's important to note that we've covered a lot of ground. We've seen with Ayushi that bits of the framework are here. We're aware that it is there. We need to work more on some parts. There are still gaps, but the framework is up there. We have identified the different actors, and also we've been able to, while we're getting the framework right, set some projects rolling. We've seen the N-Angel, which is really a project that's been deployed to make a difference on the ground. And I'm happy, and I wasn't aware that N-Angel has so much scale. And I think that's also important to note, that sometimes we finance projects with, and Tony's made the point, maybe Mauritius, we don't have enough scale, we can reach out, but we do have human scale here. So we can test the idea and then go to Africa and go to the world, go to the region. But the important thing is that we did not wait to get this right before getting started. So I think that's very important. For me, it's an important lesson because I've been at policy for a while. We've been doing innovation more generally, social innovation. We shouldn't, stop everything, start thinking, designing, and then and deploying. We've embedded social innovation within the wider innovation programs that we have, and we've tried to read the ground reality. I usually made the point that governments are typically slow at reading ground realities. When we're aware of that, what we've done is, especially after COVID, we know that after the pandemic, globally, we found there's a need for a social reset. And it's as much about new interventions, but also about better coordination. And I've heard this word often. We have scarce resources. We really have to coordinate better, get better at doing that across the whole policy spectrum. And I'm talking about not only the public expenditure framework, which is wide, which is across government, also the incentive framework, because we do try to have incentives to encourage public-private partnerships, but also fiscal and legal. So, but government, we place ourselves in the role of facilitator. And thank you, Ayushi, for introducing bees and trees, because I think that's very important to get right. Because we can't be the bees, we can't be the trees. We might be part of the tree community, but we're into supporting communities. We're into making each community stronger and reading the science, basically. And that is why we have, for the past, I think, 4 years now, with the National Innovation Framework, put into place a funding envelope, not trying to get right what we need to fund, how to direct funds at which type of initiative, but rather putting a central pot of money under the Mauritius Research Innovation Council, trying to figure out, maybe with open calls, starting with open calls, what is needed from the ground. Once we have more and better information, then we went for thematic calls. And I'm very happy with the way we basically expanded what we have. We expanded the National SME Incubator Scheme to accommodate a social incubator. We didn't try to have a standalone social incubator, because social incubators, they don't need a different ecosystem from mainstream. We actually have it in mainstream. We have all the support system in mainstream. So we basically into carving policies all around that. But I guess we'll talk more about that later. I really want to stop here and react after the enabling framework. Thank you, Raj.
Thank you. It's working. Thank you, Subhashini. I just take 3 words: framework, coordination, action, and you almost introduce the next topic, social incubation. And therefore, Sophie we'll talk about 5-6 minutes on social entrepreneurship. Language is open, anglais ou français, mettez-vous à l'aise. Faites comme si vous êtes chez moi. Okay, Sophie, please go ahead.
I'll try to continue in English, but please bear with me. I come from Trampoline today, so I'm not going to talk about this for too long, but it's an initiative from the KMG group that was just launched end of last year. So we have a very short-lived experience, and I wanted to take this opportunity to share some of our learnings. Basically, our mission at Trampoline is to support and to promote social entrepreneurship as a means to solve social problems by using business acumen. And our why, our purpose is very linked to the group's purpose, which is building a better tomorrow for Mauritius. And basically, I think it's a good example of social investment, with the only return that is expected through this free of charge and equity-free funding that we offer through the program is to invest into social environment returns. So it's really about building a better tomorrow for Mauritius. So when we launched our first call for application last year, we got to discuss and understand the needs of about a bit of over 100 leads of people that were interested in and asking for support. And we've heard about a whole lot of different actors, I would say. And what I've learned is that it's a very young ecosystem in that sense. And I think Tony will talk about this a bit more. But there is a lot of needs. There's a lot of need at different levels, a lot of needs at pre-incubation, incubation, acceleration, but not only. I think it would be a mistake, and I align with what Sebastian was saying earlier, to try and do a one-size-fits-all of getting people into boxes and getting enterprises and innovation into boxes of this is ideation stage and this is acceleration. At least that's my understanding of it at the moment. In terms of the needs as well, we see that there is a need in terms of methodology. Like Ayushi was saying earlier, even if we want to do things, we don't know where to start, where to go, and how to go about to do it. So methodology, in terms of, for example, design thinking and human-centered design, we have Wavemaker's team here today. So I look forward to the discussion, but a great initiative that was focused on building the capacity around that. And that's a methodology that we do need. But also people in the social and entrepreneurship sphere that we've engaged with also sometimes just need to be connected to people who have experience, be connected to networks. Just an introduction to someone can open so many doors. And there is a lot of information, and there is funding that is available. We do need more funding, but there is funding available, but sometimes this information is not accessible for multiple reasons. I'm not sure why, but also access to markets and support in that sense. In terms of funding, definitely there is a high need for seed capital to be made available. And I think that one of the recommendation that we could discuss is the need for seed capital that is flexible and quick to access. Sometimes we do get into the bureaucracy of having to fill up these lengthy, complicated application forms and then wait for the steering committee and then wait for the disbursement and then submit reports. And that's, it doesn't allow for the agility that is needed to get things done as much as we would want to. And I think this financial cushion is one of the, it can be one of the great opportunity to leverage. And the last thing that I would like to say is that I come from the NGO sector. I've spent a lot of time on the ground. And I think it's important to also recognize that NGOs in Mauritius, at least in my experience, have been oftentimes driving social innovation and grassroots innovation. And it's important, I think, to recognize that there is an opportunity there to build on what we have. The CSR and funding, international funding is decreasing. And so many NGOs today are in that reflection of pivoting to a revenue model and working on maybe business models or income generating activities. So that's on one side. And on the other side, we also have SMEs, for example, that really are eager with everything that's happened, even more. They're eager to develop strong impact verticals. But how do we go about to do this? And I think this is where innovation comes into place. And it's important that we create that ecosystem so that we stop working in silos. I think it's a great opportunity for us all to be here today through the Assises de la Recherche et de l'Innovation. And that's about what I wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Sophie. A number of issues will come back in terms of seed capital, in terms of funding, in terms of measurement issues. You know, we don't have KPIs because they're more complex as opposed to a conventional investment. So incubation in terms of measurement in social entrepreneurship is much more complex. That's why we need ecosystem. And that's why we'll now come to the third topic with Tony on the ecosystem. I take it from Sophie, networking is important. So how do we get the right landscape for innovation? Assuming we have a shared understanding, assuming that we have social entrepreneurs, what type of ecosystem? You have 5.5 minutes for that.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm just going to be speaking from my personal experience. So it's a bit about, you know, myself, so I'm sorry about that. To depict a picture of ecosystem, how I see it, it's a visit to Nairobi. So I've been there and I've visited the whole ecosystem there from hubs, which is more like co-working spaces. We have lots of startups there. I've been to Fab Labs where you have actually machines, people coming in to use different machines to create prototypes, etc. And then I've been to university, Strathmore University, a whole floor with about 40 desks. People can come there and they're like startups. There are 20 startups with small booths, and that's sponsored by Safaricom. I created M-Pesa. I went to Safaricom and spoke to them also there. I mean, for me, this is also what I see. How innovation actually gets generated. And for me, that's a working ecosystem. Because what happens is people, through technology, there's this idea that they can become rich. Before it, you need generations for your family to become rich. But now with technology, this is like this, and you have young people coding. And when I was at also at primary school, we have extramural activities in coding. I mean, for me, all our development that we're doing, we unfortunately need to take people outside Mauritius because they're not people. And then I'm also into a digital ecosystem, part of Google for Startups. I'm an incubator in Google for Startups. I'm also a mentor and advisor for Accelerator of Africa. And I can see how we build ecosystems also there. And pros and cons also to be all digital, I must say. So what's important in ecosystem is with stakeholders. So for stakeholders to be able to participate in ecosystems, they need to have clear value proposition. I'll take an example where CCFM did a tech for good and they were looking for a private sector to come in as a collaborator, but we had to do the call like 3 or 4 times. I don't even know if they got someone to participate. So because they don't see where's the value in terms of supporting social innovation, and this is not very clear to them, so they don't engage. So I think that's quite important. And in terms of support system, I looked at myself. We had the idea in 2017 We only started this thing during COVID, and thanks to the COVID fund, actually. If not this idea, it would never actually happen. So we went through this scheme and we managed to get some money. It was very competitive and we're lucky to get there. If not, I won't be here sitting with you talking about the application. So, and this is also a different way of tackling funding. In China, they fund everything. So we spend a lot of money, they waste money. In America, they just choose a few and they fund these. So obviously in China, they advance much quicker into AI, etc., because we fund every project, any projects. So there's incubation, acceleration, hubs, labs. The hubs actually is more like property development, co-working spaces. So you need to get all these different actors together. It's not just NGOs, you know, and there's also property developers giving the space and where innovation happens. I look at social innovation research grant. I mean, Dr. Ramjawan every year tells me, you know, no one's applying. You know, I mean, we keep on advertising, there's no one applying. But I mean, we hear a lot of things because people always complain there's no money for projects, but when there's money, people complain people are not taking the money. So there's a problem there. For building movement, I can tell you in 2006, when I came back to Mauritius, I wanted to federate all the NGOs. So I sent questionnaires out to 300 NGOs about, you know, just a couple of things, one-page questionnaire. Only 2 replied back. I had probably 20 calls. Who are you? What are you looking for? Etc. But only 2 NGOs returned the survey form. One met me, who was Mission Vert, we just started then. Just also, we talk about collaboration, we talk about all these things. So I think for me, that is a bit lacking. We started a social enterprise under South Africa Green Seed in 2016, like social entrepreneurs getting together, but that's also fizzled out. And talking about ecosystem, we heard that yesterday, I was there yesterday, everyone talks about, Mr. Mitu said peopleware. I talk about collaboration, the lady from Marina and talk about weddings. So it's about collaborating. I've heard also a lot about PPP, but there's another concept which is 4 Ps, which is public, private, people, partnership. And how do we do that? I mean, I've worked with also Mr. Makun at Business Mauritius for committees. They say, bring a project, let's do a project. And I said to them, I'm not going to do any project. First, I want to know how, when we implement national project, what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong. Because I don't want to do a project, we sit in meeting, 5 years, we're still talking about the project. So I think for us to do this, it's a strong collaboration is important. And the opportunity that I see is the funding. I see that with Green Climate Fund at the moment, because government can't do it on their own. We need private sector. So I think funding will federate the network and the ecosystem, because everyone, it's a systemic problem as digital systemic. So we get all the actors together. And I think one of the opportunity that I didn't see is, like for us, Mauritius is small. It can be a living lab. We can test experiments. We can do things. We can prove concept. I'm even offering this to some of the startups I'm working with to come to Mauritius to try it here. I mean, would you in Tel Aviv get the right to do a smart metering thing in the city? No ways. You won't even go to speak to the mayor. Here, the mayor, you call him, hey, I got this, can you give me this? And that's easy. So I think we got lots of opportunities there, building ecosystem, people, working together, knowing how to work together. I think we need to spend lots of time about that. And this happens by meeting. This happens digitally, virtually, or in person. These type of events, you know, and more about exchanging and getting together. I think that's very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. In fact, you mentioned, which again will come to the next speaker, in terms of the need for intermediation. And intermediation means building capacity. That's very important. When you were talking, I was thinking of maybe asking publicly a question to Keith as the DG of UTM. If I may change my hat for a few minutes as chair of UTM, what about UTM having a sort of a program to really connect NGOs with all the funding around, you know, MRIC, sort of trying to see to provide some form of intermediation of information. We have on one hand MRIC, we have all the different parties, the grassroots, and funding for R&D is quite important. Trying to structure whereby the information and building capacity to be able to use those funds is something probably worth asking. But this is the answer you'll give to your question. How do we build capacity in terms of bringing innovation in the landscape of social and grassroots? Keith, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a really good question to quickly answer. We do have such a thing at UTM. So we have a program that is digitalized, which allows our students to link up with NGOs for placement. And so that's something staff have been working on for some time. And it links very nicely what I'm going to say now about skills and capacity building, because a lot of what we know about skills and the knowledge that we have is very hidden. So I'm just going to give a quick example. And if I was in a classroom now, I would divide the room into two, and I'd ask these people here to get their mobile phones and to Google and have a look at a dodo. And I'd get these people on this side of the room to get their mobile phone and to Google and get a picture of a penguin. And the point of doing that is that dodo is very famous in Mauritius, and it's very famous all over the world. Penguin is also very famous all over the world. But did you know that it's the only Welsh word to have gone into the English language? So my first language is Welsh, and it's one of the things we're very proud of, that penguin, whitehead, is the only word that's transferred from the Welsh language into the English language. So now you all speak a bit of Welsh, yeah? So skills development is about, the pot is always half full. Those of you who have children, those of you who have young people in your life, that's how we construct the world of learning. We don't spend our life telling our young people, you can't do that, you're not good at that. We start with what they know. I have a very famous phrase. When I was in school, 8 years old, Mrs. Edwards said to me, in my school report, Keith has reached a very high standard at a young age. He must now accept that the leveling out period begins. So basically, at the age of 8, my teacher told me that I'd peaked. It was downhill from the age of 8. That was her prediction. Thank you, Mrs. Edward. And I've been fighting that ever since. So this approach to skills development and capacity building has to be based on strength, a strengths model. There are many people in the room would have done the Gallup strengths assessment. They will have done the Clifton assessment. They will have done Myers-Briggs. And we're very familiar with these very powerful big data assessments of our dispositions, our knowledge and our skills, and we've all got strengths that we can identify. At UTM, one of the things that I used when I went there was to find out and to ask the question, to get to know my staff and my students, what are you good at? Tell me what you're good at. And that's what we have to do in a skills development approach, starting with what we know. And the wonderful thing about working in Mauritius, the multilingualism, which you all underplay, the fact that Sophie just did the whole thing in English. I could do this in French, but I prefer to do it in English, which is my second language. But how brilliant we all are to be able to slip in and out of different languages. And we understand that. And we criticize our young people for not being good enough at French. All the employers I work with say, oh, their French is not good enough. And then other people say, oh, their English is not good enough. And then they said, yeah, and their Creole is too good. So those are the things that we have to leverage on. We have to look at what our young people are good at. The job of a university and colleges and polytechnics and schools is around accreditation. It's around assessing, auditing skills, knowledge, experience. And there was a very rich movement in the UK, which was the Records of Achievement movement that happened in the 1990s. We have to revisit those things where children would have portfolios of the skills that they acquired, particularly during primary and secondary schools, and they would take those portfolios into the world of work. And many of our employers are better than education institutions at using digital portfolios throughout people's careers. We know that things like electronic virtual badges are used widely. I've got a whole bunch of them in my watch. So every time I go for a walk, I get a badge if I meet my target. And those are the sort of things that we need to use with our young people. Lots of motivation, lots of badges. Scout movement has done it for 100 years. The guides have done it for 70 years, giving people badges for what they can do. And those are the things that will allow us to build and improve the capacity building that's needed for not just our young people, but for all our people. Learning is based on some very, very simple principles of individual, pair, small group, whole group. Now, these days, obviously, virtual and digital and online. But the key skills that we criticize our children for, oh, you watch too much time on games, you watch too much time on Netflix, too much time watching movies. But that's how they're experiencing the world. And we need to use viewing as a strength. It's part of reading, writing, speaking, listening. And we need to see gaming as a strength and to use it as something that we can build on and not kind of limit what our children can do because we criticize them because we as adults don't understand their world. So in summary, as soon as we can value our young people, our older people's strengths, working with the civil society in particular, and documenting, using micro-credentials to really get that sense of people's individual knowledge, skills, and experience that we value, but we have to take time to find out what it is, what they are, and not to judge those according to the systems that we've been judged on. We don't want Mrs. Edwards telling our young people that they peaked at 8 and that they're learning in the wrong way. So I think apps are the way forward at the moment. We're doing a lot of work at UTM with our students. We have many competitions to identify and give students opportunities to develop apps, and they love to do that. And also using those apps allows them to meet the needs of the civil society. So I'll end on apps. I'm a big fan, and hopefully that's kind of given just a little taste of the very important pedagogical view of skills development and its role in capacity building.
Thank you. We'll come back to how to take time to value and how to get that will be, of course, the apps you said, technology today we are lucky, and how much is not been underutilized in education. Pedagogy has remained very much conventional as opposed to using those tools. It will be very interesting to engage in a conversation on that. But without data, you can't do it much. So Ayushi, tell us in 5.5 minutes how this is important.
Thank you. Thank you, Keith, and the rest of the panelists and Raj. So I'm going to be speaking about data, and I'm going to be speaking about 2 points specifically. One is open data. It's raw data that is gathered by people or organizations, that is shared online and can be used by others. The important thing, it has to be machine readable. And second is open source repository. So it's a repository, digital repository where content like codes can be stored and used by others, sometimes with a few restrictions applied. Very abstract. I'll break it down. Let's speak about the data portal of the government of Mauritius. So that's one example of an open data base that everyone has access to. I'll give another example of the open source repository. UNDP, my employer, joined what is called the Digital Public Goods Alliance. It's a digital repository that's working towards human rights-based approaches to digital development. And we're about to bring a Mauritian mobile application into this repository. That application is called Espoir. I don't know if anyone knows of this application. It's an application that was born out of the lockdown, the first lockdown, where abusers and victims were stuck in houses together under the same roof. And there was a real issue of a spike in domestic abuse and gender-based violences. So we needed to find a solution. I'm not saying that the mobile application was the perfect solution, but it was a solution because what it did, it embedded an alert system that works offline. So anyone who experienced a case of abuse could use the application and it will inform authorities in real time that something was happening and that they needed to intervene. So it connects to a very complex ecosystem of people behind, and the technical backend is very important for social innovation. So what happened is that the Digital Public Goods Alliance that the UNDP has joined has asked us, the Accelerator Lab, to facilitate the inclusion of this backend into the repository, and other contexts can use that. Of course, domestic abuse and gender-based violence, the context will vary from country to country because of cultural norms, but the technical know-how is the important thing that I want you to retain, and that's why open source repositories are actually very good for social innovation. Second thing is open data. So this morning, I thought, let me just go on the national data portal, check the data sets. There were all sorts of data. I clicked on fishing. A lot of you probably know, if you're in Mauritius, our lagoons are depleting. There's no fish, little marine biodiversity and life. And our fisher communities are actually suffering because they cannot fish in the lagoons, and artisanal fishing is a major source of livelihood in Mauritius and Rodrigue. So what do? We have to find a solution. So I went on the data portal and I found a data set of fish aggregating devices that are all around Mauritius outside of the lagoons. There are 34 of them, not enough. What is the problem here? There is the data. The problem is the fisher community don't have the intuition like I do and don't have the knowledge of where these information are and how to access this information, because most of them at best have WhatsApp and cannot open Google to go on the Mauritian data portal. So the next thing would be, if we apply social innovation and data, would be to get MRIC to open a challenge, get a range of innovators, work with these fishermen, work with the Ministry of Fisheries and Blue Economy, turn these data sets into audio notes, disperse it through WhatsApp. Because we surveyed a lot of fisher communities in Mauritius. We're going to Rodrigue, I see Maurice is at the back, to do the exact same thing. And they told us, actually, we communicate via WhatsApp. We communicate all the time. We're sending GPS locations through WhatsApp. So if we are to turn these data sets, coordinates, speak in Creole, have it in voice notes, disperse it for WhatsApp, a lot of people will have better livelihoods. So I want to end with that. Two things that could really help our social innovation space in Mauritius. One, mobile apps and technical know-how, disperse it across the communities. Two, better livelihoods for our fishers through things like I've just spoken about. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ayoshi. So clear in terms of what can be done. The time has come now for us to have that space for conversation. I think it's really great to have that space for conversation today around innovation in the field of social and grassroots. And I know a number of people present with whom I work very closely, all of us here. And I think myself, I'm a bit surprised at the information or at the mechanism that frameworks which are in place, which have been so much underutilized. I think the question that probably will drive our space for the next hour is, how do we really be more effective in what we are doing today, in the light of the information that we have, in terms of precise projects that we can work out, in terms of what I would like as an outcome of this session is really to see how that information and all the things that are available can be accessible, and there can be a continuity in that conversation. So this is a bit my own sort of expectation as an outcome of this session. I think we have been bulldozed with information. All of us, most of us here are practitioners. So please come out with proposals, come out with comments. We have to be precise, concrete, and short, because so that we can have optimum ideas on how probably we can set a continuum in our conversation today. So please, ladies and gentlemen, friends, the floor is open. I take it that mics will be circulated. Just give your name, your comments, your questions, and we will be very happy to hear you. So please, do I need an icebreaker? No, good. So Tony, please comment on the back. Yeah. Allons-y. Yeah. Please, we have to be very fast because we are losing 5 seconds. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Yeah.
Thank you to all of the panelists. I think, this is so important to have us all in the same room discussing it, and this is how we move forward. To your point, I think a lot of what we discussed today has been a top-down approach. A lot of what we do is trying to solve problems and with grassroots and social innovation, we're looking at social problems. One thing I think is missing out of the whole picture that we've drawn today is that feedback loop from our communities. If you look at a product or a startup or an entrepreneur, you'd be like, okay, how are you validating that this is the problem we should be focusing on? Well, the same question can be asked to us. How are we validating that the fisherman knowing where to fish is the main problem? Well, we need that feedback loop. We need to have a way to engage with our community. And also, like you said, with the open innovation, that can be provided to people looking to be entrepreneurs in the sense of looking to solve these situations. Myself as an entrepreneur, it would be a great resource to say, hey, 80% of the people we've spoken to in Mauritius find, I don't know, collecting bins a problem or sorting their waste a problem. Now that's something we can work with. But I think right now we've looked at a very top-down approach without having that circular feedback loop. It could be an app, like you say, to communicate with and collect all of that, or it could just simply be a two-way communication WhatsApp, for example. So I think we need to take that perspective into account when moving forward. Great.
Very right. I mean, how to take information from grassroots up, not only top down, down up. That's extremely important. The mechanics of it will have to be taken, but I take it that this is a very strong point that we'd like to take, Aviraj. It's very important. Yes, please, one word, just say your name. We know who you are, but quickly.
Which is called the ABCD, which is asset-based community development. And from that, you go to the grassroots, you look at what are the case actually, which what are the assets that communities we have rather than focusing on what we don't have. What are the assets that various communities, various villages, etc., already have, and then build up on what we or find solutions to exact problems or build upon the assets that we have. So that is a methodology which is very much widespread elsewhere, and I don't know why we don't use it in Mauritius. If you just Google ABCD, you will find it.
My question will be, though we won't have the answer now, on which we have to work as a follow-up. Why ABCD is not happening? If it is happening, why it's not on a scale that is meaningful for the grassroots up? So this is something important. If we have the method, we know about it, it's not very complex. Why we're not having it, we'll have to answer it. Can we answer it at this point of time?
We're tackling problems of drug taking, we're tackling problems of prostitution, of child prostitution. We're tackling specific problems.
But not process, not method.
Not
No.
from a geographical perspective, but if you're looking at the village,
Yeah.
specifically, then you are looking at what are the assets that we have, but also what are the problems.
Okay.
Then building up solutions.
Yeah, but my question would be not to you, but why we are not doing it. So it's not to you, but if it is, we need to have a geography approach and not silos approach, thematic approach. Why? Okay, we don't get the answer here, but we'll work on that. And yes, your hand is up, please.
Everyone, I'm Jamila. I hope you can hear me. So I just wanted to add on what you were saying. So
What
we
Chaya was saying, yeah.
yeah, we work with Malina, my colleague. We work around design thinking and human-centered design. And when you speak of methodologies that really speak to
We being
communities,
your organization.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly, wave makers. So you need to have this loop of information coming from the grassroots level and asking these people what are exactly their needs. And the problem in the way we think about things, it's a very top-down approach. But if we change our mindset in a circular way, we like to use that word circular. And I used to like a framework that's called imagination sundial. It's not about frameworks, it's about imagination. Imagine a future that's better than it is right now. So there is spaces, places, packs, and practice. So spaces, creating spaces just like that to be able to get people talking.
Yeah.
Places like real physical places where people can meet and actually speak about their issues and problems. Practices, exactly what we are speaking about, either in methodologies, education, training, research, funding, financing, and packs, because we have to conclude packs with people, collaboration and co-creation. So if we use that framework in everything that we're doing and try to embed that in our imagination, I think we might come up with better solutions for grassroots level specifically. Yeah.
Thank you, Janina. I mean, what I catch from you, structured space with clear approach, okay, and methodologies, rigorous, informal, but structured with a space, and then just breaking the silos and then moving forward. That's something on which work has to be done, Aviraj. I think that's a very important takeaway to build on what Chaya said and what Janila did build up. Yes, I'm sure there will be a number of areas that will keep coming. Yes, my good friend Mauriu. Allez-y, Mauriu.
Je voudrais juste rajouter, pour rebondir à ce que Jason avait dit un peu tout le monde, sur la question de Grassroots, la participation de Grassroots. La méthode que, au niveau de INL, mais pas que INL Foundation, pas mal de ONG, nous utilisons au niveau des communautés, c'est l'approche développement communautaire. Et on l'a mentionné dans notre réflexion au début de cette session. Je crois que c'est une approche qui vraiment mérite qu'on s'y attarde et que les autorités, les institutions apportent vraiment tout leur soutien, parce que c'est vraiment une approche qui donne la place aux acteurs de la communauté, qui deviennent acteurs de leur propre développement. Et ça, c'est très important. Et vous avez parlé de différentes approches. Nous utilisons, nous, ce qu'on appelle le Social Needs Analysis. Donc, à la base, c'est la communauté qui vraiment définit quelles sont sa réalité par rapport à sa réalité, quels sont ses besoins, quelles sont les problématiques auxquelles ils font face. Et ça, c'est vraiment la base, le départ de tout. Et à partir de là, la communauté devient acteur de l'aide au propre développement. Évidemment, avec un encadrement spécialisé, avec des financements, et ainsi de suite. Mais je crois que cette approche mérite d'être mentionnée. Et je voudrais dire par rapport à ça, et je ne rate aucune occasion pour le dire, c'est toujours dommage de voir dans des forums comme ça, justement, on parle de grassroots, on ne retrouve pas ces personnes parmi nous. Ils sont absents, ils n'ont pas la voix, ils n'ont pas la place, ils ne peuvent pas participer dans ce... Ils sont peut-être représentés par les NGOs, mais ça ne suffit pas. Il faut leur donner. Ils n'ont peut-être pas le niveau d'intelligence, d'intellectualité, mais ils ont la réalité qu'ils peuvent apporter. Cette contribution est importante. Parce que des fois, on décide des actions, encore une fois, top-down approach, et on ne touche pas la réalité de ces personnes. Autre chose que je voulais rebondir, c'est sur la question de private sector. J'entends souvent, et on limite trop souvent l'action ou la contribution du private sector comme funders. Je crois qu'aujourd'hui, Raj, tu l'as dit, avec les limitations du CSA, Lévi, ainsi de suite, je ne vais pas revenir dessus. Aujourd'hui, dans le domaine social, du moins, on connaît l'apport du secteur privé au niveau économique. Mais aujourd'hui, dans le domaine social, je pense que le rôle du secteur privé dépasse tout simplement de funding. Et je voudrais juste partager avec vous, et ce n'est qu'une petite, humblement, c'est sharing, c'est vous donner par exemple l'exemple, ce qu'on est en train de faire au niveau du groupe ENL, c'est aller au-delà, bien sûr qu'on ne peut plus autant financer comme avant, mais aller au-delà de cette question de financement, on se lance dans un programme qui s'appelle le mécénat de compétences, où nos employés descendent vers les ONG, partagent leurs compétences à des ONG pour justement les rendre beaucoup plus professionnels. Donc, c'est une petite goutte, c'est un exemple que je peux vous partager, mais c'est pour vous dire que exactement Trampoline, ce que le groupe Karim dit fait, ça aussi c'est un exemple. Au-delà de financement, on peut innover, on peut apporter notre contribution. Alors, ne limitons pas le rôle du secteur privé simplement comme des funders. Troisièmement, ce que je voulais dire, et je termine, le social enterprise. On parle beaucoup de social entrepreneurship, social enterprise, mais sachez qu'il n'existe aucun legal framework, un cadre légal qui peut régir ce secteur, qui peut dynamiser ce secteur. Et ça, je pense, aurait été vraiment intéressant de s'y pencher dessus. Merci.
Très bien, merci Mario. Je crois que tu as soulevé quelques points extrêmement pertinents. I'll come to you. Juste pour ceux qui sont en train de prendre des notes, c'est extrêmement important que ce que Jason a dit, le bottom-up, ce qui a été dit par Chaya, Janila et Mario, et que malheureusement, souvent des fois, ces personnes n'ont pas l'espace. Comment, dans la continuité, trouver un espace au niveau, je sais pas, des instances comme les ONG, de faire une continuité dans ces discussions-là, dans l'espace communautaire pour un échange. Il y a un travail à faire là-dessus. Concrètement, comment faire l'intermédiation de ce qui a été fait ici au niveau du grassroots et lorsqu'on quitte ici, on ne s'arrête pas là. Ça, c'est extrêmement important. Bien sûr, le rôle du privé dans le social est beaucoup plus complexe, maintenant beaucoup participatif, comme ça se fait dans le développement durable. Aujourd'hui, dans le développement durable, production énergétique, il y a un rôle important et on parle de sustainability and inclusiveness, mais cette dimension doit être encore travaillée. Je pense qu'avec les fondations, avec ce on a commencé avec le CSA, il y a quelque chose à continuer. Peut-être il faut relancer l'équipe des pintades, Mario. Je ne sais pas. Alors, bon, ça, c'est un petit secret. On avait un comité des CSR managers avec Mario. Lorsqu'on avait commencé le CSR, on a eu beaucoup de suggestions positives. Et puis, en termes de technologie, on a parlé de technologie, c'est quelque chose à vraiment travailler sur le bottom-up. On work on that. Allons-y. Vous avez the floor. You have the floor. Please go up.
Thank you so much. My name is Viken, and I'm from the NGO sector. And I just wanted to remind that we're very far from this research and development culture in Mauritius. And MIRC previously was the MRC. They were funding social development projects, and they were funding some researchers in that sense. And now maybe they have the constraints. And I think that's very important to look into it, because if each local government had this data about the needs of the population in wards and whatever you call it, we would have enough data to innovate from there. And the second point I wanted to make is that we notice now that there is a need to have the right information, the right data. And how do you get the right data? And I think we really need to have a Freedom of Information Act, which would democratize information, and we can get access to this kind of information so that we can build on it. And I would think that when we are in that kind of forum, many people are here and we can influence policies. So this is the duty of everyone to see what can I do to influence so that we can get that kind of freedom of information. Because when we have access to data, then we can build upon it. Thank you.
I'll give you the floor. I'll ask Subhashini to just comment quickly on the open data, which have been implemented. There are about, she was telling me, about more than 300 sort of database available. But what is it? I remember some years ago, World Bank were presenting a report on open data. So because there has been some progress, but how do we move forward on that?
Thank you. But just before we talk about the data sets, I'd just like to have a quick reaction to what has been said. And what I notice is that we need to construct an architecture, the supply chain. It's not that we're talking about top down. It's not only top down, middle. It's a lot of things in between that needs to get structured. And I think it's about the construction, the architecture. When we talk about government as a facilitator, we're talking about something else as facilitating on the ground. When we talk about facilitation, we're talking about training, about different enablers, another order of macroeconomics. And we need other enablers on the ground. We have problem owners, we have solution owners, we have to get that organized before you tap into funds. Funding really comes last. And we put a lot of emphasis on putting funds, but sometimes the funds are out there, sometimes they get spent, but we see no impact. So I think it's very important to really, and we need to map that out and chart out how many different layers we can see today, because a very young ecosystem around social innovation, but it's important at least to have the different levels there, understand better, understand what needs to be done, what types of intervention at different levels, because we've opted to be broad-based around financing instruments. We just put a range of financing instruments out there. It's within the innovation program today. We can expand that, we can have more, we can't have too much because then it becomes completely unreadable on the ground. So it's about tweaking, getting it right. But the financing instruments, being broad-based is a choice because it has power, but also will not suffice. And I totally agree with you that we need to structure the whole thing. And very often get a lot of things that does not involve a lot of funds because the funding is already there. It's in cost centers, sitting in different departments and setups. It's already there, so we need to connect. So to me, and listening to different methodologies, I think it's very important to have this conversation and to know what to start with and to run a pilot and have more incubators, maybe different models of incubators. We have space for that, but we need intermediaries because just government and social incubators and community is not enough. I'm guessing we need at least 5, 6, 7 layers before we eventually start fixing the problem. Open data, I just have touch a word on that. We do, if you look at the website, I think the last time they mentioned 365 open data sets. Do we need 365 open data sets or good ones? Should we focus on the 50 most important ones, on geospatial data, which would unlock a lot of value? I think we also, because we're trying to be broad-based and do lots of things, when we don't really are focused on being demand-driven. So for that, we need a better mechanism for having conversations around what's needed and to pull the data and organize that data and to make sure that we're adding value so that it's packaged in the right way to be consumed by not only the community, but those who are there at level 3, level 4, level 5, helping the community. So that's my take on it. We do have a lot of data, but we need to run a check through what's valuable, and we're meeting whose needs before we take it further. Thank you.
I'll come to you, Tony, one sec. And just to make it quite clear, I think that proposal of getting the intermediation right, like we have financial intermediation. We don't only have banks and those who are deposited, there are a wide range of architecture. There is some serious work to be done, I think, in terms of, on one hand, the instruments, the other hand, the users, but how do we have the right intermediation through the right architecture, but also through with all the stakeholders coming in, and that's going to be very important. As probably we have to work more to create a pipeline of projects, a pipeline for innovation. How do we have the right architecture to have the right pipeline and to keep going? Tony, you have the floor.
Yeah, thanks. I won't be too long. I've heard about design thinking, feedback loop. And for me, I don't think it's a problem because any startup won't survive if you don't get feedback loop. So this is deemed to happen. If you're a successful startup, you need to design thinking, you need to know your customers, you need to get feedback loops. If not, you're out of business very quickly. I want to recenter also the discussion about social innovation. The issue that as a social innovator, that I find we don't have social enterprise, how do you say that, like legal structure. I mean, that's not particular to Mauritius. Even South Africa, it's the same thing, etc. And the issue for us, because the social enterprise, we're not actually making, we're just making money to be sustainable. So then this is where the issue is. We're doing things for the public, like our app is for public goods. So we're not selling shoes, innovating the best shoes or whatever, and selling to make money. So this funding is a big problem, because even if I go to private sector, as I'm a social enterprise, I need 1 million for my app. They say, but you're not an NGO. I can't give you money, because what happens if you take money, you go for dinner with your wife, you know? So this is very, very problematic in social innovation. If we talk about innovation, fintech, oh, great, you know, I'm going to make major money. I've got a peer-to-peer lending things, etc. So that's easy. And for us, we don't have business model. We're creating social impact. So who is actually going to give money for social impact, and who will, you know, government, obviously, big role to play, private sector, do you have mechanisms to be able to help social enterprise, or should we just be an NGO, what you help? So this is important. And one last thing, we always concentrate also, oh, we need this, we need that. The thing is, I mean, I've come from green building. People say, I don't do green building because I don't have money, etc. AFD put the green loan out, no one comes for money. So, and then we say, no, we need this, we need this, we need that. But this is just a fallacy. I think you don't need all of these things. You know, we need to get out there, get it done, you know, overcome the barriers. And when we get to there, if we need open data, then yeah, this is an issue, let's address it. It's true, it's very important. But this is very difficult to achieve also, even within ministries. There's lots of infrastructure, info highway, publishers, demand, etc., subscribers. So it's very important, but I think we need to get out. And I say we've got innovation culture. I mean, I've seen Mauritians, I've lived in different places in the world, and you have, you know, the Mauritian community, and they always débrouillard, you know, they will, yeah, I mean, you can see that, you know, on the beach, people, the tourists want something, say, yeah, no, I can get you, my cousin does that, and this does that, and whatever. So I think this culture, we have it, and to nurture the culture is what's important. I mean, you have lots of Mauritians in big positions, in big companies all over the world. So I don't think this is what's missing.
Thank you. Yeah, we have now we'll go back to the floor, okay?
Yes.
I wanted to get some feedback from our panelists. Right, your hand was up, then your hand, I think I saw the lady first. And you've seen on my panel, we have 3 ladies. So ladies, gender is important. Please, you have 2 minutes.
Yes. Thank you so much. My name is Shesta and I work for the NGO Gender Links. Thank you very much for the acknowledgement of the NGO work, but allow me to be a bit critical here to say that it's not always easy for us as NGOs to write certain kind of projects, despite the fact that we see that there is this social innovation trend. The thing is that access to information is limited in a certain way, that when we compare what we are required to give in the application form for donors, we don't have sufficient information to provide. That's the first thing. The second thing, I've been in the NGO sector for almost 8 years now, and I've seen a lot of people going and coming because it's kind of difficult for people to accept a full-time kind of permanent job in the NGO sector. How many people, how many students, I mean, have completed a degree in social work, but how many of them are willing to start a career and stay in the NGO sector when we know for a fact that it's difficult to secure funds to pay for the salaries of those people working in the NGO sector, while at the same time we are talking about professionalizing the social sector. So what I'm trying to put on here is that we still require a lot of capacity building, a lot of training in terms of how to write, how to fundraise for social innovation projects, because we want to do it. We acknowledge that it is important, and we acknowledge the benefits of it for the grassroots level interventions. So I wanted to seek how we can collaborate in future with the MRIC to actually make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, clearly it has emerged that there is a need for capacity building en amont, even to apply for innovation fund. I think that's something which is extremely important and will come out as a clear recommendation. And I see also Keith here, maybe universities, institutions, and NGOs having a space on skills, on capacity building only, for example, as one of a sub-thematic on which we can come up. You have the floor. Please go ahead.
Alors, je suis Jonathan de Médine, CSO de Médine. J'aimerais apporter 2 points qu'on a parlé par rapport à SWET. Donc, au fait, on avait discuté que on parle beaucoup de culture. Donc, juste pour vous dire qu'au niveau de Médine, nous, et dans la culture de Médine, depuis quelques années, on a développé le Médine Volunteers qui encourage les employés que malheureusement ne peut pas s'engager après les heures de travail, tout ça. C'est une nouvelle manière d'aider la société en s'engageant par rapport à leurs skills. Donc,
Mario a mentionné
ça. Moi, mon point, c'est par rapport à ce que Mario a dit aussi, c'est le développement communautaire. Je ne vais pas être long, juste pour vous donner un exemple que, effectivement, le développement communautaire emmène des fois de l'innovation. Par exemple, il y a un projet qui existe depuis 22 ans à Berkeley, qui a fait ses preuves. Et à travers ce projet-là, il y a un centre actuellement qui est doté d'une salle informatique, d'un IT lab, atelier de musique, etc., médiathèque, qui emmène l'innovation au cœur d'un site, dans un endroit où il y a un problème. Il y a souvent des stigmatisations, tout ça. Mais à travers le développement communautaire, on voit que les gens sont à la portée des services que le gouvernement offre, même le secteur privé offre, et ça amène des impacts positifs. Et je pense que c'est important de valoriser et de vraiment mettre beaucoup d'efforts dans l'approche du développement communautaire pour permettre à tout le monde, tous les secteurs, de participer. Donc voilà, c'est un peu
Très
mon
bien.
point.
Non, l'approche communautaire et puis best practices. Hein. Quelque part, je ne sais pas, l'inventaire des best practices à Virage, quelque chose à réfléchir. How do we optimize and showcase best practices? Next, il y avait quelqu'un à l'arrière. Yeah, allez-y. Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, good afternoon. I am Yatin from the International Organization for Migration. What I would like to point out is when we talk about capacity building, most of the time we fail to see the existing capacities of grassroots organizations and the people. I think the first thing that we have to do is to assess the existing. We can kind of leverage that existing capacity first, because most of the time, if you look at the literature, while I was sitting here, maybe some of you have noticed, I was just browsing through the literature on this. There is an overemphasis on, portraying those grassroots people as vulnerable, as prone, as in need, as, they are weak, but this is not the case. These people, they do have certain capacities that have to be recognized. Especially, we also have to lay emphasis on the gender aspects of these things, because women, we have seen in India, we have a lot of women self-help group. Those women self-help group, they come together and then they start an organization that is successful, that helps, these women to put together their efforts and to sustain them economically. I think we also have to think about this aspect. Thank you very much.
Gender-based, of course, and also not having the préjugés en amont when you're dealing with all different grassroots. Yes, there was someone at the back. Yes, please go ahead.
So I'm Sedanu. I'm from a tertiary education institution, because I'm not representing my school and not from which institution I am. But I think that two or three things that are important, because we are on the proposition side. So I'll not go for criticization. I think what is important, the idea of professionalization of social work practice has been raised. But I think there is something that is fundamental that we have to think about. That after 50 or more years of independence, we have got a system of education that's very prescriptive at the level of primary. We still have books that are given to students, and teachers don't have the enough space to innovate, to be creative, and to go for innovative practices. So I think we're preparing a generation that is going to take over from an innovative perspective. I think we have to think about giving more liberty instead of going for prescriptive dimensions of teaching and learning. The second thing is that I'm happy that we've got people from academia. And what is important is that if you go on the internet and you go to look for about theorization that has gone on in the field, I think we are very much poor in that. And I'm happy that the Assises de la Recherche is mentioned there. And I think there is enough of space after 50 years of existence as an independent country to make good of our own references, to be our own incubators of knowledge, instead of making referential from the Eastern side or the Western side or from African countries. Why don't we become a center of creativity in terms of knowledge base? And I think this is something that is important. And I would also like to stress on something, that we shouldn't be thinking about innovation as something that belongs to the state. I'm happy that we've got an institution like MRIC that is taking the lead. It's also the credit of the government and the institution and the thinkers as well. But we have to think also, we have to develop a culture of innovation. And it is not the paradigm of only one institution or the state to take over. I think there is some mutualization that has to go on. Because who benefits from when our students are learned? It's not only the government, it's also the private sector. How much of private sector is giving to the field of research as contribution, I would say, in a partnership approach? All the European countries have done that. You go for funding and you subscribe, they give you funds on that. And most probably what is also important is that I have taken note that we are too much centered on the ideal, I would say. There are certain things that has to be, I'm not blaming things. I'm just taking it from a perspective of being very much open. And this forum, I think, is going to be very much gaining from the perspective that we make of inclusion. That we have inherited a system that is exclusionary, not right from now. Now, our system has been groomed, and it's the ADN of people to exclude people who are poor, prisoners, people who are disabled, people who don't have means, just to name a few. And this system of exclusion creates whatever type of innovation, if we don't develop that culture of innovation through acceptance and developing a new mindset. I'm happy Madam mentioned it, that we have to develop that mindset so that we can, in the future, have a generation that is more egalitarian, that believes in inclusion, that works for equity. And I think there is something that has to be done, and I'll stop on that. We can debate afterwards. I think there is something that is very important, and I would have very much been grateful if we could make a space for that. That our system of education is very much academic. We are trying to get rid of that elitist system with holistic education and things like that. But in all countries, we have got something that is called the social immersion of our youth in social work. That we have very much compartmentalized 12 weeks of classes, 3 weeks of holidays, 12 weeks of classes, 3 weeks of holidays, and then we have 2 months of holidays. And what happens, there is no connectivity, nothing done there. Whereas if we want to innovate in the field of education, I think that this is a prime time that we have to make these people become responsible, have a social cohesion, make them go and walk the field and try to learn what is happening. And I think this is something that is going to contribute in the long run to make our youngsters more welcoming and accept to work as social workers in a more voluntary manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are some very pertinent points which have been raised. And I will invite Keith to come in after my comments. You know, I mean, the question of education, inclusiveness, in question of l'engagement communautaire. There's some education system where you have to do your community work. For IB, International Baccalaureate, you have to do your CAS, and whereas, so I think that's something extremely important. Where do we build in? How do we do projects on that? I know that there are some people testing some ideas on that, but I really like to have Keith coming in on that, saying some of the things you're trying to do at UTM. And then, of course, Priscille, yes, Priscille wants to come in after you. Keith.
Thank you much to that gentleman. I wrote so many notes. I've got a page full of notes then, keywords. Thank you so much for your intervention. I think there's so much involved there. And one of the things that I'm particularly interested in was your intervention about the curriculum itself and giving that trust back to teachers. And I think, you know, this is not a criticism of Mauritius, it's a criticism of the world goes through particular moments in their history where there's a lack of trust in the teaching profession, and we need to gain back that trust and hand over the responsibility to the teachers. I think we're at that stage. One of the things I really took from your intervention was this notion of Mauritianizing the curriculum, and everything that we do has to be more Mauritian. As a foreigner coming here, it's so obvious that what needs to be done is to extract and to purify and to foreground the Mauritian aspects. We've done a lot of work at UTM trying to make our curriculum feel more Mauritian. What are the unique selling points of a Mauritian higher education system, a higher education institution like Mauritius, like UTM, I'm sorry. And so I think there's so much in there. I think maybe one of the outputs and the outcomes of this, these 3 days could be a focus on education. I know many of you will know Professor Serge Rivière, and he has published so widely. I think we're up to something like 80 books or 37 books, I can't remember. But he recently in the newspapers was saying that there needs to be a kind of re-examination of the education system, and to have a whole process where we look again at this moment in our history at the education system, and to get people around the table and to exchange. And you know, I haven't met you before, and I'm thinking, how have I not met you in 2.5 years? And you know, so it's thank you so much to our MRIC for putting us all in the same room, because now these conversations will lead to some outputs and some, I'm convinced, some actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Creating space for structured discussion with work done en amont we see the result. Probably that's a major takeaway for us, Aviraj. Priscille, you have the floor. Allez-y, Priscille.
Thank you, Raj. I'm Priscille from Lovebridge. I just wanted to introduce just a thought on three things: vis-a-vis, agility, and gap. If we look back at February 2020, before the first confinement, a lot of things that we held as truth about the field, now in 2022, no more. The field has changed so fast on the ground, so many things happen that it seems from our observations that there is a disconnect between the responses that maybe the public sector, the private sector, they do have vis-a-vis, they have representation, but the social sector, we do not have a representation, a vis-a-vis, so that the other partners can come talk to us and then have input from the ground in real time so that the responses can be agile. So I'm just gonna lay that down. I'm not gonna comment more on that, but maybe one thing, an example, in 2020, during the first confinement, there were so many things happening and we wanted to have data, collect data about how the families were living the confinement, the impact on the families, financial impact, health, security within the home. So we volunteered with Business Mauritius and humbly gathered a network of about 30 NGOs, and all 30 of us worked hard during the confinement to collect that data. And we did work together, but it's not our field of expertise, is it? Data collection and then processing all that, giving out, it took 3 months. But now the data is already obsolete. So if maybe the MRIC could help us with that, getting data that could help us maybe then tailor our own responses to the changing reality on the ground. So that would be a second thing, and that was all. Thank you.
Thank you, Priscille. I see 3 hands up. We are reaching towards the end of our discussion. We have only 10 more minutes. I see 3 hands up. I'll take the 3 hands. But before that, I'll ask Ayushi quickly to say a word on data, the whole issue of that, and to the question raised by Priscille. You can just say something, Ayushi? You have 1 minute.
Sure. On data, I think you'll all agree who's producing data today is us, citizens. So one thing, pretty much everyone has a mobile phone, pretty much everyone's on Facebook, and pretty much everyone is writing about how they're coping with certain things. And citizen-generated data is a real empowerment tool for NGOs. So if you could invest in monitoring or tracking citizen-generated data, of course, you don't have the capacity because sometimes NGOs are one-person-led, but this is where agencies like the MRIC could help. And just secondly, as a response to gender links and others in the room, we shouldn't be confusing or using social work and social innovation interchangeably. I think that in of itself could create a lot of confusion, but I take your point into consideration. Grant makers need to do better by grantees to allow you to do your work, your necessary work on the ground.
So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a very key point in terms of citizens triggered info. How do we use and optimize and make them usable? That's a very important point. Okay, some work again for the team to look on that. So yes, your hand was up. There was a second hand down, and then the third one. Okay, 4th. So we'll wrap with the 4, and then we'll conclude. Please, you have the floor. Yes. Oh, okay. The mic with you. Go ahead. Okay.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Annelise from Le Pont du Marinier, and I wanted to talk about what Priscille just said. It's very important and dear to my heart because I have a project actually. I have a dream, you might say, of having these data available to all NGOs, and that the response could be coordinated, whether it's public or private sector or NGOs working with grassroots, that we could share and refer, because NGOs can't cater for all of the issues that we face, but so that there's this better coordination, I reckon there's food for thought here. We've experienced it with the first lockdown. We worked very hard, like Priscilla said. We collected data rapidly to be able to address all the issues, and we were able to do it under stress, under unbearable circumstances. And I believe if we put a lot of work into it, we can coordinate better, work together, and change the way we do social work in Mauritius and innovate. And then I wanted to also make a point about the PPPs. I really like what Tony said earlier about the public, private, and people
Social
coming together to make projects. And I've been working on projects like that for social housing in Black River. But unfortunately, what we encountered is that policies in place actually don't make room for it to happen. So we have to maybe be more flexible or find frameworks to be able to apply new policies rapidly so that we can move on and progress with projects that will serve the community better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No, there are some good best practices again. I mean, Rivière Noire for the toilets, you know, what was done. We are fully aware of that. Public, private, and NGOs. It was more private and NGO. Right. I think data is something we have to look at clearly. Yes, you have the floor and the mic. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Romola Ranchal. I'm Associate Professor at the University of Mauritius. Just 2 points. One in response to what Professor Keith said about knowledge on the Mauritian reality. I would just suggest maybe some kind of schemes or incentives which schemes or incentives which would either give scholars based locally the space, time, or resources to write textbooks, whether it's on the Mauritian economy, Mauritian society, but this would be local knowledge. So, and this, because we always, one of the professors who visited us from Malta, and he said, but you don't have, I'm in the sociology department, but you don't have theories based on Mauritian knowledge. So he made that remark. So there is a gap in that area. And second point is about just, I'm a gender studies scholar. So all these different, when it comes to data, one thing we came across in the different research that's been going on is the lack of gender disaggregated statistics and the need for training of those statisticians who collect the data. Sometimes the information is there, it's just not compiled. So that would help in planning and design. And that the different social projects should have a gender dimension because it affects men and women differently. And also the non-binary, if we go beyond. Thank you.
Thank you. No, there are huge information I know available in the household survey by the Statistics Mauritius, and they can be disaggregated, provided there's work to be done. And I think there's need for some of our lecturers to go for PhDs, research, so that this can become knowledge, okay? Conversion of what we have as information into knowledge. And this will need that type of follow-up, you know, our professors giving more scope for PhD workers. I thought that will be important. Right, there is someone lost, I think, not the least. Please, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vijay. I'm from Global Rainbow Foundation.
You're from Global?
Rainbow Foundation.
Okay, yeah.
I have rather comments and questions, but which are related to a few of my colleagues have mentioned that. I'll start by the star of the show today, which is data. My colleagues from the NGO sector would probably agree with me. The latest census we have for the disabled community in Mauritius dates back to, anyone? 2011.
Okay.
That's the last census that we have. There is a reason why everybody is today mentioning about the data item. It's not only about figures, but it's also about the intervention, the collaboration, and the things that we at the NGO level could do if we have access to those information. And I get back to Mr. Viken, who spoke about the Freedom of Information Act in a certain way, probably not related directly, but I think it is critical for all of us who is sitting in the room today that we agree to it, that it is critical we speak about this. I'll touch back again on Priscilla, who mentioned about the issues and the hard work that we had to go through during the lockdown. Yeah. We went to the method that Ayushi mentioned earlier, Facebook, Google, WhatsApp. Why? Because there is not a base that we can look at. We service, I think Le Pont de la Marinière, we're already collaborating as well. So there is a big gap there. So I think we have to look at that aspect of, I'm not saying we need to have up-to-date information yesterday to today, but at least we need to have something in hand that we can use. Now, putting that conversation further, my colleague from Gender Links mentioned about the capacity building and about the aspects of people. Now, I'm talking about more from the angle of inclusion. Yeah. One of the SDGs we are looking at is about the reduced inequality. So the disabled community in Mauritius, we don't know how many people are there. As per the last census we said earlier, 2011, we were around 30,000 people. Our work on the ground tells us that figure is 3 to 4 times more today, but we cannot correlate that information. Getting back to what she mentioned is, there are people in that particular community that are so abled that they're not being tapped onto, just because there is a lack of information. We do not know where these people are potentially. But what I'm trying to say here is from experience that when we are working with people on the ground, we could see what the potential are. So we need to look at the whole framework in terms of, do we have those data in hand? What should the authorities do? How can MRIC, for example, help us in terms of gathering those information or those data, or put a platform at the end of the day where we could gather those information and share amongst ourselves? Yeah. So making the use of technology at the end of the day. Yeah. So that's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your comments with respect to data. What has emerged, before I'll give the last word to Aviraj and try to conclude from our panelists, I think I see about 4 or 5 main points have emerged clearly. First and foremost, about the bottom up. This is something which has come out very clearly. Number 2, creating space for that bottom. That space is extremely important, but there cannot be just space without preparation in terms of work done before the space creation, structured research so that they'll be meaningful. And tied to it, there will be innovation, because then we'll be creating a pipeline for that. Okay. Number 4, clearly on data. But this is so wide, and I'm sure that it'll be interesting for MRIC with a group of specialists to look at the whole issue of data, how to optimize, because with that, you have the info to make things happen. And number 5, in terms of intermediation structure that Subhashini mentioned, so that it gives meaning to optimizing what we have as resources, as funding, as best practices. You know, there's an architecture in the whole intermediation and disintermediation, in the construction and the deconstruction, which is probably something we have to give some serious thought. So these are our main takeaway, my takeaway, after having listened to all of you and our panelists. And it was a real pleasure to be back again with this crowd. Thank you, Aviraj. You have the floor.
So just as a final word, before saying thank you to Raj and to all the panelists, I would like to say, you know, as Confucius put it, a journey of 1,000 miles. Start with the first step. And as you know, it's not been, social innovation is a very new space, and we are only starting. It's a nascent field. And today we are united. We have started a journey with you. It's just something that we will snowball, and we are getting more. We are seeing more and more people who are into this space. So of course there is a lot to be done, and we will have some teething problems. There is a lot that we will need to borrow from what we see happening elsewhere. We have a lot to borrow from other partners in academia. We've heard a lot about data. I presume a lot of this is applied social research. So we do take note of the former schemes that we used to have in the old days of the MRC, where we had unsolicited research grant schemes for people who see a disconnect and they want to investigate, and they would apply for grant schemes that we would then fund. In the past, we used to fund social fabric studies, for example, which would give us an indication of what is happening in the country. And we used to have updates just so that we are, we understand where is society, what are the main social trends, what is happening in society. And we have not been funding similar studies in the past. We would believe that academics would be the right recipients of research projects like this, together with data on the ground from investigating among the grassroots, etc. But I note that there is enthusiasm and that there is a passion to drive change, and we can only thank you for all this, and we will be getting back to you and to other partners to see how we can move from here. So with these few words, big round of applause to yourselves and to all the panelists, and of course, Raj, who has moderated our session. Thank you very much. And our refreshments outside are waiting. Thank you.